People think that you grow in the light, but really I say you grow in the dark. Because in the dark is where it challenges you to get uncomfortable, to find out who you are, how strong you are, and what is it going to take to get what you want, and how much are you willing to get knocked down and keep getting back up.
Welcome into this week's episode of the Dynamis Podcast. We got a really cool episode. We're out here doing the Vegas circuit. And while we're out in Vegas, my bonus dad, Ernie, introduced me to a longtime friend. This guy is he's crushing it. What he's doing, the businesses he's building, it's truly next level. And how he has been able to scale his business, what he's been able to achieve, the network, the connections he's been able to make, very inspiring. We're going to cover a lot of things. We're going to talk about mindset. He's going to drop a lot of nuggets of wisdom. We're going to talk about his journey through entrepreneurship. We're going to talk about systems, SOPs, checklists, conversions, sales. And we're ultimately going to land on what he's doing with that high vertical income and how he's taken it to continue to build his wealth in outside assets besides his business. But this week we have a really cool guest. His name is Rich Light. He's the founder and CEO of Glossit, a company based here in Las Vegas, Nevada. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be on the show. I've heard a lot of good things through Ernie, who I've known for more than 30 years. He texted me. I was on my way to Cancun, and he says, hey, I want you to listen to this podcast. I think that you could add a lot of your knowledge and your experience, and this happens to be my stepson, but I think you need to listen to the podcast. I was pretty impressed for being as young as you are. I think that being around Ernie, who's always been a very positive person, he has a presence and energy about him that's contagious. Even when things are going bad, Ernie's always has a positive attitude, which means that, hey, shit happens. We'll figure it out. It's a learning experience. Let's move on. Let's get it going.
Yeah. And you guys actually Ernie and you have a pretty cool story. In fact, years before I even started my own entrepreneurial journey, he was telling me all about you. Years before my brain was big enough to understand the concepts of getting to the next level, mindset, entrepreneurship, we'd be out working on the boat, detailing the boat after we took it out of the water. And he'd be telling me stories about you and the products that you designed and how not just like the quality of the products, but your progression. He would tell me that he used to pull up to your shop just to get his car detailed. And that turned into you developing product lines, which turned into this huge, really big business that you have now with how many employees work for your?
So inside and outside, there's a total of 32 employees. When I met Ernie, there was probably less than 5 or 6 of us working in the shop on Spring Mountain and Jones, which is Chinatown. And it wasn't Chinatown then, but I met Ernie and his brother and his old man. And those relationships came from meeting key people in town, which I call born and raised vegans, people that went to high school here, like the Wins, the Marnells, Beckers, the Moran family, Sheriff Moran, the kids, Stephen Klubeck, Diamond Resorts, Danny Gaines when he was alive. And I was the new kid from Boston, and everybody called me the hustler. I had crazy energy, and I overwhelmed people when they met me. They were like, you sure you're not on drugs? And I said, I'm absolutely not on drugs, but I am high on life. And I was very driven. And that ambition is what sparked me to move to Vegas. And I told a lot of stories on YouTube about my car relationships and my customers. And it was on a channel called Man Wiki, which you guys can check out. I told the LaFerrari story about how Steve Wynn and I had a relationship, and he offered me a job, and he wanted me to run transportation and just fold the business up. And I said, Mr. Wynn, I respect you and everything you've done in the relationship I have with you, but I'm going to build my own thing. And he said, you never touch on my cars again, but thanks. I wish you the best of luck. And people thought I was crazy when I turned it down. I told this on YouTube. You can check it on Van Wiki. It's the LaFerrari story about how Steve got into it with the Ferrari family, about the LaFerrari he wasn't supposed to sell. And I had worked on that car when Steve bought it brand new. And because of that relationship of working on that car, it attracted the founder of Copart, which would be a good person to have on your podcast. It's I believe, a $8 or $9 billion a year company. They buy all the salvage insurance cars in 8 countries. And the guy who started it, his name was Vinny Mintz. And he became a customer of mine because of the LaFerrari story. And so when it comes down to getting people's attention, I always say, if you're not telling stories or you're not sharing what you do or how you do or why you're different, nobody's going to know who you are. You're never going to be on the radar. And so Sometimes people think they need to monetize from every type of relationship. I tell people the relationships are the new currency, and every relationship equals resources and leverage that you currently don't have. And if you're able to add value to people's lives and not ask them for something, but ask what can I be of service to you, they're going to invest back. But it's not about what you get. It's about who you know and how you work with those people and how you collaborate that will change your life.
When I walked in here, you're joking a lot. You're a lighthearted guy. You're quick on your feet. And you kept making comments like, I'm just the car guy. What do I know? Right? Like, I'm just the detail guy. But last night you were hanging out with a name like Bradley. You're just telling me a story right now about how you turned down a personal job offer from Steve Wynn. Mm-hmm. And if you're not from the Las Vegas area and you don't know who Steve Wynn is, just put it a quick Google search and you'll quickly be educated. Steve Wynn's one of the biggest names in Vegas. He's a billionaire.
He's what built Vegas, him and Bugsy Siegel, right? Yeah. They were visionaries. They saw this patch in the desert and they saw opportunity and they painted a picture in their head of what the city could be and they made it happen.
Yeah. So you're hanging out. Okay. You're turning down job offers from Steve Wynn, hanging out with Bradley. I mentioned names like Ryan Pineda and you're like, oh yeah, I know those guys. And you're in here, you're joking around that you're just the car guy, but that takes a supreme level of confidence to turn down a job from Steve Wynn. I'm just curious, like, where did that drive, that hustle, and that innate belief in yourself come from? What did you see in yourself when Steve offered you a job and you said no?
I saw lack of control, lack of vision. I saw lack of opportunity because I build my own paradise. Nobody else builds it. And I'm the only one that knows what my paradise is. And so growing up with a father who was an entrepreneur and watching him build an empire in building custom spec homes and developing commercial properties and real estate and auto parts. He was the first auto part store in North America in 1973 in the United States. He was the first Bosch distributor for Bosch fuel injection, which was in every car in the 80s. And as a kid, I worked for my father in his warehouses, packing exhaust and spark plugs and distributor caps, and just watching my dad build this business in the morning. In the afternoon, he's going out and finding dirt and building lots and meeting with clients and building spec homes. So you're a product of your environment, which has a lot to do with what your journey has been because you've been around Ernie since you were young. And so when you watch somebody lead by example, right, and they allow you to give you the space to figure out who you are and what you want, all you got to do is observe and apply and execute.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a natural progression, right? You look at like great athletes, look at Tiger Woods' kid. He's up and coming, right? He's around his dad who lives, breathes golf, and he's one of the best in the history of golf. And when you look at the Becker family, the grandfather came here in the 40s from LA, right? And saw an opportunity and bought dirt 10 or 15 years before anybody even thought about building on those areas. And then Ernie's dad, he was in the business. And then when I met Ernie, Ernie was getting to the point where he was working with the family and working with his brother Brian and his sisters. And I met all the family. And so they've always been hustlers. They're always looking at opportunities and saying, okay, what's the long game in this? What's not the short game, right? Because if we look at the short game, there's no real return on short game. You can obviously monetize on a short level, but there's no stability in that, right? Everything's long term, right? It's the long game. And I think that when I told Ernie I was going to start this company and I was going to create my own detailing chemicals, Ernie is like, yeah, do it, dude. Like, you make great product. Everybody loves the work you do. Go for it. I had one product. It's called Gloss Enhancer. It smells like pina colada. You probably use it on the boat. He buys 5-gallon pails of it. I think he's addicted to Gloss It, but it's the smell, but it's also like the memories that you built with him detailing the boat and then using our product. So I always tell people I built a TV commercial by accident a few years ago, and it was on Meckham and Barrett Jackson, and it went pretty viral because people like the fact that every car has a story and every customer has a story. And what makes Gloss It different is that we understand the stories that you have with your car because we'd rather pick your car before we pick you.
The ability you have to articulate, deliver a message, communicate, tell a story. It's not that you are selfishly out to get something from other people, but the better that you can tell a story, the more you can sell.
Right.
And I'm curious, where did that come from? How did you learn to tell those stories? Because I go on your social media, I go on your website, instantly you're telling a story. To me, that's very natural. My generation, that's how we have to survive in business today. But just one generation above, there's a huge disconnect here.
There is a huge disconnect.
You have no fear of it. It comes
No.
very natural. Where did that storytelling ability come from?
I think that came from observing my father, who's an entrepreneur, and watching how he communicated, how he built relationships with strangers. He just had this innate ability to build connections with people. And being a kid and being around him all the time, you're going to learn. You're going to be a product of your environment. People used to call my dad's business and I would pick up the phone. They thought they were talking to me. And I said, no, this is Junior. And they're like, no way. And I said, yeah, this is the son. This is not the father. He's like, you sound identical to your dad on the phone, just the way I communicate. But I think, again, you're a product of your environment. So the more you're around people and the more you become a sponge and listen, the more you're going to learn, right? Yeah. I think storytelling comes from being confident, being passionate about what you're explaining to people, because if you can't articulate your story, people are not going to relate. And every great brand you've ever seen in the world was built on a story. Look at Steve Jobs. Look at Bill Gates. They all had a passion and a story, and their brands became the story. Nike, we've all just watched the great story of Ben Affleck and Matt Damon telling the Nike story, right? With the King sneakers before Nike. And so when you look at the stories behind that, is because people think that you grow in the light, but really I say you grow in the dark. Because in the dark is where it challenges you to get uncomfortable, to find out who you are, how strong you are, and what is it going to take to get what you want, and how much are you willing to get knocked down and keep getting back up.
Yeah. Well, if you just look, as a metaphor, you look at a seed. The seed of an oak tree is tiny, right? Mm-hmm. And you plant it in the ground. It's got all the DNA to grow into this massive, huge, just structurally sound thing. But what has to happen is that seed's placed in darkness. And it's uncomfortable. And the seed has to actually die in the soil that it's in to then persist and push up and spread roots and grow. Just through that storm is opportunity. Do you have the courage and the tenacity and the endurance to continue through that storm? You mentioned earlier that you grew up with an entrepreneur father that set the example for you. There's this old parable. It goes something along the lines like, once you find the way, you can see the path in all things. So my question is, what's your story?
I started the business in Boston in 1990 in Quincy, Massachusetts, which is a suburb of South Boston. And I was doing work for car dealerships. We called it recon, not detail, reconditioning. And at the time, I had just gotten married. I was very young, and I had my oldest son, Christopher, who's now a CFO of a company in Manhattan. But when I met Jenny, that was Christopher's mom, her father was a retired colonel in the Army and top graduate of West Point.
Oh, wow.
And here's this guy who wants to detail cars for a living out of a used car lot. He told me that I needed to go get a 9-to-5 job, that there was no stability in this, and this was just like never going to go anywhere. And it became a real problem in my marriage. And I was a young kid having a young boy. And it was really difficult because when I went to my wife at the time and I said, hey, I'm not giving up my dream. This is what I believe. She said, the Boston Fire Department wants to hire you because you're young, strong, smart, and this will give us stability. And I said, yeah, this is not what I want. And I had to make a tough decision at a young age. And I said, yeah, I'm going to leave. And I ended up meeting a gal that worked for a talk radio station in Boston with Howie Carr, who's a big political guy. And the show's still going live today. And I was invited on the show because I was a young kid, an entrepreneur, to come on the show and tell my story. And the sales manager at the time, her name was Jackie Landry was her name. She looked like Pamela Anderson with green eyes, and she was going to be a GM. And they asked her, hey, we want to move you to the San Antonio market or the Vegas market. She said, hey, you want to go for a trip? We went to San Antonio, Texas. We went to Vegas, and we decided Vegas was a good spot. And that was in 1994, January. And we flew out here together and decided that I was going to wrap up the shop in Boston, sell it to one of my employees and their family, and they bought it, and start from scratch in Vegas. And that's when I found the Spring Mountain and Jones location in a shopping center, which was not conventional space by any means. A shopping center with a car automotive shop. It was just not normal. And there's like all these retail stores, and there's a 2-bay shop in the rear facing a Nevada Bob's and Walgreens pharmacy. But anyway, long story short, I had just gotten divorced. I didn't want to be in a serious relationship. I wanted to focus on myself and my business. And I left. We were here together 6 months in Vegas, and I left and said, I'm doing my own thing, because I saw an opportunity to build my own identity in a new market that I thought was up and coming and growing, and that was Vegas. So I made a go of it, and I started the shop on Spring Mountain and Jones, and that led into developing product and meeting other people in the industry, chemical manufacturer. We call it organic immunofunctional chemistry. And then I started to learn that through other masters at it. And I said to Ernie one day, I said, I'm going to build my own chemical. I want you to test this out. And I started handing out bottles to my clients. This is great, man. You need to release it. And so in 2007, I started the brand Gloss at SEMA, which is an automotive convention for manufacturers, Ford, Toyota, Porsche, car, stereo, parts. It's the biggest convention in the world. And that was my first year. And I was 37 years old when I started this. That was pretty young. And then I started branching off into other chemicals and other products. And things started just to snowball. But I think that I was always hungry because I wanted more. And I always knew there was more out there. And at the same time, this is when my real estate journey started happening, where I started buying single family homes and doing flips. And then I had another business doing car audio and stereo systems and boats, right? And then I had another business doing home innovation and home theaters and like Spanish Trails and other communities here in Vegas. So at one time I was in my 30s, I had 4 or 5 different businesses going, plus the real estate. And I never slept. I just kept working.
Were you running all of those businesses?
I had partners. Yeah. I had partners. So either I was the investor with overseeing the operation, or I was involved day-to-day operation. So what I learned from that experience is that I was burning out because I wasn't putting my full attention to one thing. And I tell everybody, master one thing and do that one thing and be the best at it. Because when you try to do too much, you spread yourself too thin, you're not going to get results. Yeah. And if you do, it's not worth it. You're going to actually burn out and then you're going to quit. And so I decided when we had the recession back in 07, 08, 09, that I was going to change things up. Obviously, what I did was a luxury, which is a want, not a need. So I decided that I was going to put all my attention into Glossit and still continue with the real estate, but everything was going to go into Glossit. And then I decided in 2012 that I was going to branch out, and I opened up a shop and warehouse in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which was our second location. I figured if we had a West Coast operation and an East Coast operation, this would give us another ability to scale and grow. But I didn't know enough at that time about how to manage coast to coast. So I went out there in 2012, and in less than 9 months, I had hustled without doing any ad spend, just like I did in Vegas. And I built relationships with car builders and business owners that made South Florida rock and roll. And a couple of the car collectors was funny, came to me and said, you know, we've got 100, 200 cars in our collection. There's 4 of us, and we're spending $3,000, $4,000 a car with you to work on them. What if you just sold everything to us that you just built, and we'll continue to use your products? And they wrote me a large check that was 7 figures to exit out of Florida. But they're still today using my products, these guys. And they're still using the guys I trained from 2012.
So they're still buying your product.
Yeah. They're still, but here's the thing. They don't do any outside business. It's only just for their cars. Yeah. And their collections are insane. And so what they did is, when I said to myself, well, here's an opportunity. So they like what I built. They like the systems I produced, the training. Why don't I just do this myself? Why don't I run boot camps and teach other automotive shops how to do what I do? Yeah. Right.
And here, this is the thing about entrepreneurship, is like, you just have to pick a vehicle and you have to start, because you knew that you were going to be successful. You had this undeniable belief in yourself. You're going to bet on yourself. Mm-hmm. How you pick detailing, I have no idea, but you saw the opportunity somehow all those years ago in Boston, and you started against the advice of, you know, your family and the certainty of the fire department. Most people would kill for that job, but you saw an opportunity in yourself and you took it. We haven't even gotten into what you have going on now, but now you're doing boot camps. You had a 7-figure exit for a private car collection. I would imagine that Glossit right now probably does
8 figures,
8 figures a year. Yeah. So they're doing 8 figures a year. You just cannot see the opportunity, the doors that are unlocked, unless you start. And there's a lot of people that are stuck and frozen in inaction. They don't want to move because they don't have all the clear path. They don't have the answers figured out. What would you say to those people that are stuck in inaction?
Pretty simple. One is be committed, right? Yeah. Make your decision and don't waver from that decision. Don't back out of it because you're having a bad day or You get thrown a curveball because you don't even know how to like overcome this because emotionally you're allowing it to get to you. So what I tell people is take 30 days at a time. Look at every day as either a win or a loss. At the end of 30 days, add up your wins and losses, right? And I guarantee you, if you stay in the game, you're going to have more wins and losses, right? But what does that mean? It's like playing baseball. If I want to get on base, I got to hit a single. If I try to hit a home run every single time, I'm probably not going to do very well in the game. But if I just focus on getting my single base hits and I hit a lot of single base hits, what do you think is going to add up after 30 days?
A lot of runs.
So what you need to do is just focus on your wins, right? And every day reflect when you go to bed, write down in a notebook, what did I accomplish today? What was my win today? And write down your losses and then journal that for 30 days. Go back and look at your journal after 30 days. You're going to be shocked because all that data, even from your losses, it's really just an education. I don't really consider those losses. Why? Because that's information about what I need to do to get on track. What do I need to do differently that I'm not currently doing? Now, there's 4 things I teach in mindset to everybody, which you guys will like. The first thing is I tell people accountability, own your shit. I don't care how good or bad your reality is. It's a reality. And this is a starting point. Without a starting point, without ownership, that nobody did this to you, you're not a victim. The world is not bad. You built the perception. You built your story. So what do you own today? Who are you? Number 2, get clear about what you want. Because without clarity, you have no direction. You would not be able to go from point A to B if you were crossing the country, would you? You would have to have a map, right? Without a map, without clarity, you're going nowhere fast. Number 3 is who must I become to have what I want? What I mean by that is the version of who you are today won't get you where you want to be tomorrow. So ask yourself a question. What habits do I need to change? What are my current choices and what are my outcomes? Outcomes come from habits and choices. And if you don't know why things are happening, you can't change it, right?
Absolutely. A lot of what you're talking about has to deal with growth, right? Personal development, growth. Was this exemplified to you or did you stumble upon it or is this just natural inside of you? Like, how did you pick up on these concepts?
Well, what I realized is there's a guy, you probably heard of him. He's a good friend of mine. I was one of the first guys to train with him, and that was Garrett J. White. Crazy motherfucker. And he's built a society of men who are married with families, who are entrepreneurs that don't know how to have balance in their life. And we call it the game. And he gamified how to have time for yourself, time for your family, time for your business, right? What does that look like? And so back in 2015, I realized that I was hitting a wall hard first, very fast. And I talked to my family about it. And I think I was just getting burnt out because I run hot all the time. And I didn't know how to balance. And that was starting to affect me. So I found this guy watching a UFC video on a Facebook ad, walking the crosswalk from MGM to New York. And he's screaming and he's cursing and he's just raw. And I'm thinking this guy is some like UFC guy. And then I clicked on the ad and I went through it. I really related to this guy. And I said, there's something different. So I said to my father, who's very honest, I said, will you watch this video and tell me what your thoughts? He called me back and said, how do you do it? I said, what do you mean? He goes, this guy is just raw and real. He goes, how do you apply? And I said, well, there was a link and you put your information in and you go through this process. Well, the first call came from Sam, which was one of the guys, his partners in the company. We had a 3-hour conversation about my life. And then he said, you're going to get another call in a few days from Garrett. And then Garrett called me a few days later and we had a 4-hour conversation. And at the end, he said, are you in or are you out? And if you have to think about it, you're out. And at the moment I was like, well, I don't like my current reality. I don't have the skill sets. The mindset is not in the right place. Anything's going to work. So I called my father after the phone call and he said, how'd it go? And I said, he asked me if I was in or I was out. And then he said, if you have to ask me how much this is, you're not in. And it was a lot of money. It was a lot of money.
How much?
It was 5 figures. And it was an 8-week intense training course. And it was game changing for me because what happened was out of 1,000 applicants, they actually picked 10 guys to go through a boot camp. It was a commitment to be the best version of myself, but also learn who am I, where am I going, and why am I doing this, right? And break it down. So I end up going through this with 10 strangers in a military physical. It's crazy, kind of like getting dropped out of a boat at 2:00 in the morning, blindfolded, and you got to help you and a partner get back to the beach, and you don't know where you're going and you don't know what direction. You can't see shit. And that was an exercise about being in the dark. And so when the dark shows up in your life, what do you do? Do you panic? Do you react? Or do you respond? And so these are all exercises that we went through. And the guys that I went through were like Rick Steele out of Phoenix, top line guy in the world. Him and I are 4:00 in the morning doing sand cooking on the beach in Laguna, looking at each other with no sleep, but 20 minutes in the last 24 hours, doing all these physical drills and then meditating. And so Garrett created this program. And then you have the guy, Dave, who started hotels.com. Then you got Vito from Boston, top headhunter in the country. He had picked all these different guys, and you had to learn how to work with your brothers. And that was intense. That was game changing for me because those guys are still my buddies to this day. And we still call each other up and we still talk about like things that are going on in our lives and how the dark shows up every day. But the point is that how do you see the light? And with Garrett, who's now grown tremendously, I went through different levels of training with Garrett. I went to the King's Council, which is a mastermind of the top 20 guys in all Wake Up Warrior, which there's over 500,000 guys now worldwide. And then he handpicks people. And then you go through a 6-month, you do the calls, you show up to the live training at HQ in Laguna, which is Dana Point actually. And so I've done all these progressions. So the biggest thing I have to tell people is that if you're not investing in yourself, why should people invest in you?
Absolutely. Yeah. Are you still investing in yourself?
Yeah. So that's a good question. So when I look at going to different masterminds or small groups with other men, to me, it's like people always say, well, how'd you build all these relationships? I said, because I invested. Proximity is everything.
Absolutely.
And so when I go to like a mastermind and I hooked up with all these people that I know, it was because I invested in myself, investing in these relationships. Tim Grover, Michael Jordan, I became friends with Tim Grover. I met him at a mastermind. We talk every 6 months, right? The guy's an animal, right?
Yeah.
You want to talk about focus and discipline? Look this guy up. Tim Grover is the coach, the mind coach for Michael Jordan and Kobe Bryant, and the guy's a beast.
Yeah. He just actually came and spoke to our mastermind a couple of weeks ago, actually.
Yeah. Did you talk to him?
No, I didn't personally talk to him, but
So I hung out with him. He's a neat guy.
Yeah.
You want to talk about discipline? I never met any other coach with that kind of discipline other than Garrett. Garrett J. White is the same kind of like beast. And I think that you have to be like a little off to be that kind of person. I think that you need to be so obsessed and relentless about what you want. You got to be a little off your rocker.
Yeah, I agree. Because there's days where you just don't want to show up. You don't want to do it. And to get to that finish line, to get through that time of gluttony, of laziness, you kind of have to be insanely committed to that end goal.
To the point where your family thinks you're nuts. Your friends think you're nuts, right? Everybody thinks you're off your rocker. But then when these results, so I always say there is no overnight success, right? Like people build things from being relentless consistently every day, right? And my dad always taught me as a kid when I would complain, you know what he would tell me?
What's that?
Mind over matter.
Yeah.
And I hated it. I hated it. But when I was raising my boys who are now 30 and 24, my oldest son is an entrepreneur. He's a hustler like me. I told him, I said, you're going to think I'm the biggest a-hole you ever met. But when you get older, you're going to thank me.
Yeah.
And it took years and years for him to say, yeah. And I said, what have you learned from your father after all these years? We talked recently. And he said, never quit. Quitting is not an option.
There are certain themes of success. The resiliency of the mind.
Do you know what I call it?
What do you call it?
Low gear. It's not moving very fast.
Yeah.
But it never stops moving.
It'll climb straight
low gear.
Yeah.
And then when you think that you got nothing left in the tank, until you push yourself, you don't know if there's more.
I'm not saying be masochistic, but if you haven't pushed yourself beyond the point of breaking, you don't truly understand how your mind lies to you in the incipiency of that journey.
Do you know why?
Tell
Your
me.
mind tricks you. It tells you stories. And it's whether you have the strength to believe those stories are real or not.
Yeah.
You got to dig deep, right?
Yeah.
We call that the inner voice.
I always think of it as like, it's like the control center. Okay. You're sitting inside of a cockpit or control center And most people quit when the alarms start going off. First alarm, second alarm. And to really push through, to get to the second, third, the next level, outer orbit, it's having the ability and the awareness to know yourself well enough to know when can I reach up and turn off these alarms, but monitor the system to know how far is too far, right?
I think I call those like KPIs, key point indicators, right?
Yeah.
And so when you look at like scaling, right, it's kind of like military, right? So everything is a strategy and everything has a plan, and every plan has to have execution to have results. So when we look at if we look at life and we look at every week and we look at our results, we have to ask ourselves a question: am I on course or am I off course? Right. And how do I know that? Because my KPIs are going to tell me, my lagging and leading indicators are going to tell me where I'm sitting.
Yeah.
Right. Because I always tell people when I train on my platform, right, numbers don't lie.
No, they don't.
Right. So if you don't have your own analytics to look at where your benchmarks are in your life, you don't know if you're losing or winning because you don't have the data to show you.
Right.
So I think that when I shoot for a target, I always say, people say, well, that's just good enough. And so what is good enough? How do you quantify that? How do you explain that?
Yeah.
Your good enough and my good enough are probably two different things. And then you wouldn't know what my good enough is unless I push you through that.
Yeah.
Right? Because you don't have anything to relate by.
Yeah. The difference between good and great is just an overwhelming amount of work.
Well, think about it. Like Tim Grover says it, because him and I talked and sat and had lunch and stuff. He said when Kobe would tell him when they were training and they were doing drills, why are we doing this drill for 8 hours? And Tim says, because that 0.1% is what makes you different. But to get to that 0.1% is going to take this kind of commitment, discipline, and persistency.
Yeah.
That's what we're playing with, is a small margin.
And that's the difference. That's the difference of the elite versus just everybody else.
So when everybody else is sleeping and partying and going to nightclubs and doing whatever, it doesn't matter, hanging out at the local bar, ask yourself a question. Does this make a difference in your life? Does this add to making your life what you say you want it to be? Or is this just an excuse for you not to be committed?
Right. And if it is an excuse, then you're going to sit back and you're going to come up with all these reasons why you couldn't do it.
That's the self-doubt. That's the part of your brain that tells you, and the people around you. So who you surround yourself with represents who you are.
Yeah.
And when you get to a certain level, your circles get super small. You want to know why? Because people don't level up with you. They're going to disappear.
They do.
Because it makes them feel guilty about their lives, their lack of commitment, their lack of drive. There is no luck. I mean, we're in Vegas, right? Casinos. Why do you think they build these casinos? The casinos win all the time. If they did, they wouldn't be building these structures for billions of dollars. So when people say I'm lucky, I say there is no luck. The difference is I show up every day consistently. Do you?
And you put KPIs in your process.
Yeah.
You have numbers that give you instant feedback. And you have, what's more important is you have the emotional intelligence and the awareness to take that feedback as a leader and look in the mirror instead of out the window. Data is just data. It's not meant to give you an emotional reaction. It's just feedback.
I think one of the things is that when you invest in yourself, you also invest in your team, right? Because a leader will walk with and do with, won't just point the finger.
Yeah.
And people are not going to respect you unless you can do what they can do.
Yeah.
They won't. And so when you ask somebody, don't ask somebody to do something you can't do.
Right.
And expect them to do it and be upset. That's setting yourself up for failure with your team. What can I do to make them a better person in their role, right? And also know people's strengths and weaknesses, because sometimes we put people in tasks that, yes, I believe are uncomfortable, but if they're not progressing, getting whacked over the head because they don't feel they perform, that could be other reasons, but you have to have conversations with your team to know what that means, right? And I think that building teams is very difficult because you have different personalities, and understanding the personalities of each person on the team, and also what are their strengths and what are their weaknesses, and being very direct and honest, not because you're trying to put them down, because you want to see them grow.
Yeah. And
for me, for a long time, I was the long ranger. Funny story, when I was going through the training with Garrett at Wake Up Warrior, it was Warrior Week 23 on YouTube or Vimeo, we did these drills. This is a good example. And I've always been an athlete and I've always been competitive. So we were with Satema Galley, Patriots. He was our coach. And me and Satema banged heads real bad. Like there was a personality disconnect where their egos were getting involved. But we had this drill where we're carrying 80-pound sandbags up Laguna Hills. And so we had this drill where we had to run up like a mile up a hill and then run down. And so I thought it was a competition. So I ran up and I ran down. I dropped the sandbag, like, yeah. And I got in trouble for that. Why do you think?
Team.
I wasn't a team. And so they had to keep drilling into me. You are only one person.
Yeah.
There's a team around you of 9 other guys, and you keep showing up as the only person. And I got disciplined for that. I felt like I was in military boot camp, and I thought, this is just ridiculous. I was so angry. And they were teaching me a lesson, not because they wanted to put me down, but because they wanted to teach me what I'm not seeing. Because remember, perspective is one-dimensional. No, it's multidimensional. And so when we look at life, there's other dimensions in the current dimension that you see. You're seeing one. There's 3 others, right?
Yeah.
So Katie Byron said it well when you look at it, and she's a good read. When you try to look at a situation and you're angry, there's a series of questions you can ask to look at, is this true or is this not? If I said you're a-hole, right? What would be the opposite of that question? Am I an a-hole? Right?
Mm-hmm.
So perspective is everything. But if you're not looking at the total 360 of what's going on, you're not getting the true perspective.
Yeah.
So going through this training and doing this became innate for me because of training with this group of guys.
Yeah.
Right. And what I learned was that the only person that can change is me. And the only person who can grow is me. But if I don't work well with others, why would people want to work with me? They're not going to. They're not going to be committed. So what I figured is, you asked me what changed from the beginning of the podcast. Be of service to others. Don't expect anything back. Learn from those experiences and apply that to your life. And your life, I guarantee it will be different.
Yeah, I would echo that. Absolutely. And then empowering your team.
Yeah.
You know, like if you want to get to the next level, you have to take what you know and give it to those below you, because it's just going to naturally elevate you in your leadership. And then having the awareness to take that feedback, like you were talking about. You're being punished for not being the team, right?
No, I was a part of the team because I was operating. I was being selfish, right?
That could have gone one of 2 ways. It could have been F you, but you had the awareness and the desire to change and to grow, and you had the perspective of being proactive, that you're in charge of your outcomes and your trajectory. And so you had the ability to filter that, take in that information, chew on it, and say, does this apply to me or does it not? And it took balls to say, you know what? Yeah, they're showing me a part of myself that I've been blind to. Yeah. I'm going to implement that and move forward.
Well, there's a difference, right? So when I looked at it, I said, okay, I'm operating from a survivor mindset.
Yeah.
I'm not operating.
Which is scarcity.
Scarcity,
it's
right?
Abundance.
Because there was fear, right? And I was living in fear. And they're showing me is that you were trying to control things because you were in fear. And where did that fear come from? And then going in and triggering things that I didn't deal with.
Yeah.
Remember, when things show up in your life consistently and they keep happening, it's because you never dealt with it.
Yeah. And
if they keep showing up, take action, do something about it. And I guarantee it's probably not going to show up again because you got past it.
Yeah. I always say, you know, like God doesn't want us acting in fear. He doesn't call us to be scared little field mice running from hole to hole. He calls us to walk upright, head back, shoulders back, head held high, chest out, leading by example. That's not from a place of fear. Look at the lion, king of the jungle, right? Yeah. It roams around. It's not afraid.
No,
it's king of the jungle because it understands its purpose. It has just the belief in itself, and also the confidence which comes from just a stack of undeniable proof that they are in fact the king of the jungle. Yeah. You don't get that. You don't walk around with that type of presence in fear.
No, I think that for people listening to this and wanting to say, well, it's a lot harder than what you think. And I think that the reason that you're thinking that is because that's a story you've sold yourself. And so why don't you write down, after you guys listen to this podcast, if I could build the perfect life, what would that look like? And my dad said it well, son, everybody has a paradise. What is your paradise? So write it down. And the thing is that it's not going to be easy. There's going to be a lot of pain. There's going to be a lot of fear. There's going to be a lot of emotions that are going to tell you something differently. But if you can push past those fears and tell yourself, this is just temporary and it will change.
Yeah.
It will, because what's guaranteed in life? Death and taxes.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. And so everything else is temporary. You know, my wife said to me last night, she's an artist and she's going through and she's looking at these paintings and she has her own perspective. And she's like, I don't think it's right. And I said, why don't you sleep on it and look at it tomorrow through a different lens? Because right now you're only seeing the lens of today. Tomorrow's lens will be totally different.
Yeah.
And she called me this morning and she said, that was like great advice. Right.
Yeah.
Because what you go through today is today. What you go tomorrow is tomorrow. It's being in the now, right? But knowing that the now doesn't determine what's going to happen 100%, because as you change, your choices change, your outcomes change, everything changes. Yeah. If you have people around you that are telling you that's crazy, that's not going to work, you can't do that, well, then you've already failed because you've believed and bought that story to be your reality. And so here's a piece of advice. When people are trying to tell you, when you go to a friend and say, hey, I just had this happen, what do you think? Well, if you wouldn't want their life, why the frick are you going and asking for their advice?
That's right. Amen.
Go to people that represent what you want to be in life, and those are the people that you want to listen to because they've already been there, done that, saw the dark, went in the fear, took the risk. So go to them. Like Ernie and I have been doing this for 30 plus years, and everybody think it was a piece of cake. Nobody knows how many stressful nights of no sleep, sweat, nightmares, things that we went through. But those were all created because of our own choices.
Yeah.
Right? Simple. There are no shortcuts. So when you watch all these TikToks and social media reels and stories and posts, it's fake, you guys. If you really looked, and I've met some of these people behind the scenes, they don't have a pot to piss in. They're flexing. They're trying to be something because they don't know who they are. So they think that if they flex and they show off, that people are going to like them. And if those people like you for that stuff, you're around the wrong people, man.
Yeah.
Stay around your family. Your family's always going to be there for you. They don't judge you. What they look at is they give you honest feedback to whether you're freaking up or you're on track. And family's going to tell you how it is. Stick to your family because your family is going to be the people that are loyal to you.
Yeah. It's not going to be easy. You're going to be under pressure and there's going to be sleepless nights. And a consistent theme that I bring up in this show a lot is an encouragement to lean into that failure, that pressure, that discomfort. People need purpose, which comes from pressure more than they need money, more than they need comfort. And I think a big problem that we have, especially with men, with masculinity, but with women too, in society, in our culture, we have no purpose. We want everything easy. And when you have an aversion to doing something difficult, God made us to carry a load, to feel the weight. He built us to pull a load. And when we have no load to pull, we divert very quickly off course. I believe we need that pressure.
God knows who you are. And he puts challenges in front of you because he knows this is what's required in your life. The question is, do you accept it or you deny it? Because when we get away from him is when things really start falling apart because we don't trust in him to be there for us. Yeah. And that's because we don't trust in ourselves.